2019, Illinois spent $35 billion on K through 12 education. In 2024, Illinois spent $44 billion K through 12 education. 35 to 44. In 2019, fourth grade reading scores, 35% were proficient, meaning reading at grade level. In 2024, 30% of fourth graders in Illinois reading at grade level. 35 billion to 44 billion, 35% reading at grade level to 30% reading at grade level. More money and a deterioration in results. 35 billion in 2019, 44 billion in 2024. Eighth grade reading level, 36% proficient in 2019, 33% proficient in 2024. Huh. Isn't that interesting? I thought it was just about the inputs. That's what I've been conditioned to believe. That's what I see politicians in Illinois from the governor on down celebrating. We poured billions more in K through 12 education. You did. It's true. And we're so uninterested in the and question. And what happened? It got worse. By the way, the idea that K through 12 is underfunded in Illinois is a difficult one to make when you look at the per pupil expenditures and compare that to the entire Midwest region, where Illinois is well ahead of Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, in terms of per pupil spend. You know, when you don't just look at the state, and that's just the state spend, when you don't just look at the state spend and you look at state and property taxes, the primary funding source for K through 12 education, Illinois is always in the top 10 in per pupil expenditures. Not so much in results, though. Rick Hess wrote a piece recently talking about 4 states that could teach the rest of America something about getting kids to read and perhaps even do math at grade level. Certainly the reading score, since we're focused on that. That's a good start when only 1 in 3 are reading proficient coming out of grade school in Illinois. That should shock people, but it doesn't for some reason. 4 states that could provide some guidance to the rest of the country. Illinois, not one of them, unsurprisingly, after what I just told you. Rick Hess is the Director of Education Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute and author of the book, Letters to a Young Education Reformer. Rick, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Good to be with you now.
Tell us about those 4 states and what distinguishes them from their brethren.
I wrote about this in the new education issue of National Review. The 4 states are kind of loosely labeled the Southern Surge. It's Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee. These are not the states you usually see flagged in the mainstream media as models of American education. But these 4 states have been making lights-out improvement over the last half-decade, last 10 years in reading and math performance. And strikingly, to your point, they have done it while spending, Illinois, for instance, spends about $22,000 per year per student in public schools. These states are only spending a little over half of that. But only 2 states, for instance, have actually increased reading or math performance overall since the pandemic. These are 2 of those states. Mississippi and Louisiana. If you look at Harvard University's report card on academic recovery from the pandemic, what you see is that all four of these states are in the top 10 on reading and math. Alabama was first in math recovery, third in reading recovery. Louisiana was second in math recovery, first in reading recovery. So these are states that when you talk to folks in the New Yorks and Chicagos and Washington, D.C.s, don't get a lot of love, but they are delivering the goods.
Yeah, I'm just feeling middle-aged, college-educated women on the North Shore spitting up their mochachinos right now, listening to this. That Mississippi and Alabama have something to teach Illinois about reading and about teaching kids how to read. But so this is, and I don't want to overstate the case either. This is not to say that Alabama, Mississippi, these states that are surging are killing it. They're not, they're not at 80%, 90% reading at grade level, which is, where we want 100%. But I mean, they're not, lapping the field in terms of the aggregate. It's the recovery from COVID, as many school districts and school systems languish, like Illinois clearly has. And so what have they done, or what have they been doing that is different than maybe what an Illinois is doing that is now starting to show results? Give us a case study.
No, so exactly. And let me just add one just add one other bit of context so that those folks don't dismiss this too much. It's not just the recovery. You're exactly right, but it's also that they have now surged to a point where, say, the left-leaning Urban Institute, if you look at state performance on the nation's report card, the National Assessment of Education Progress, and you just adjust for demographics, overall, it turns out the Urban Institute reports that Mississippi fourth graders are first in the country in math and reading. Louisiana's fourth graders led the nation in reading growth for the past two NAEP cycles. So I don't want to make it too easy for those sophisticates to say, well, it's just recovery. What are they doing? The most striking thing is that what they are doing is what you would talk about in Big Ten football as focusing on the fundamentals. There is a commitment to basic skills, focus on phonics-based early literacy, giving teachers strong training and coaching in phonics, and selecting rigorous classroom materials.
That sounds just crazy enough to work, and it's and it's working. That is stunning. They also moved some legislation, like you mentioned in your piece in Alabama, that they now require 9 hours of science of reading training for K-6 teachers. I mean, so you're talking about actual legislative action consistent with sort of that back to fundamentals approach.
That's right. And that thanks for clarifying. That's crucial. Because what's happened is over the decades, in teacher training, for instance, most teacher colleges don't like phonics instruction. It feels too rigid. It doesn't reflect kind of the ideological direction of a lot of teacher training. So if you just encourage them to do good training, you run into a brick wall, because they have entrenched practices that are problematic. So, for instance, in Louisiana, they passed a law outlawing what they technically call 3Qing, this idea that instead of helping kids break down words, you're pointing them to cues, to images, to pictures, to help them guess the word. The problem with this, of course, is especially for kids who don't come to school having been read to a lot by parents, who don't come from homes where there are books and reading, this creates a set of shortcuts where they never master the basic building blocks of reading fluently. So, Mississippi deserves credit here for being first out of the gate. Their superintendent, Carrie Wright, in 2013, launched a series of efforts. They had in 2013, they did what they called the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. So statewide, the law embraced phonics. It held back third graders who weren't reading at grade level. It institutionalized literacy training for teachers. It provided literacy coaches to the elementary schools that weren't getting it done. So it's not just saying we should focus on these things. It was really lawmakers stepping up and saying, by gosh, we're going to write this into expectations. We're going to change teacher preparation. We are going to make sure that teachers and schools have the tools they need.
Yeah, and on this Mississippi example, it's really interesting. Again, this is from your piece. They also instituted, identifying kids that were struggling to read, and rather than just passing them along, as you say, they held them up, but they held them up with a screening system. They screen 3 times a year in grades K through 3. Then teachers work with parents to create individual reading plans for each struggling student, diagnosing specific skill deficiencies and spelling out appropriate interventions. So they identify somebody that's, a kid that's struggling, early on, primary grades. Then they intervene, and you got a teacher, and you get a parent, and you got a plan, and you execute the plan.
Exactly. And part of the problem here is that a lot of the, education experts, a lot of, affluent policymakers, they say, well, wait a minute, my kids already know how to break down words. This sounds too fundamental. This is too intensely focused on phonics. And what this kind of mindset tends to miss, of course, is, if you are reading to your child every night, if your kid is in a home surrounded by books, it is true that they are very likely going to pick up a lot of this stuff by the time they're in first grade. On the other hand, for the majority of children who are not in those environments, who aren't getting read to, who don't have books in the home, it's incredibly important that we actually provide this kind of scaffolding, these basic skills, this kind of direction. And what's happened is all of those sophisticates in schools of education and on left-leaning boards of education just have lost sight of that over the decades. And so what you're seeing here is a huge correction, leaning into the things that kids need if we're going to give them a chance to succeed.
And the other thing you write about, too, I don't just want to focus on the kids because you want, motivated, enthusiastic teachers. So many leave the profession because they can't do what they got into teaching to do. And you make the point that teachers in these states that are part of the Southern Surge, as you describe it, are actually happier and more energized about their work as well because, they can actually achieve some results here.
Yeah. Right. Nothing is more frustrating as a professional than to go into an environment where it feels like nothing is working. And if you're teaching a kid and the last couple of years, they didn't get what they needed to become literate or numerate, and suddenly you're having a lot of people yell at you to get them where they need to be, that's an incredibly frustrating place to be as a teacher. So in these states, for instance, Louisiana, over the last 3 years, has reduced its unfilled teacher vacancies from 2,500 to less than 1,000. People want to teach in this environment. There's a notion sometimes in the NPRs, the New York Timeses of the world, that teachers don't like phonics. Well, what they're finding in these states is that when you give teachers clear, strong training in how to teach phonics, when it's introduced to them in teacher training and when they get coaching on it, they like it because we all like being good at our jobs. And if teachers see that these techniques are really helping kids read, that's incredibly rewarding. And then Louisiana in particular has taken one more step. State Superintendent Cade Brumley has launched something called a Let Teachers Teach initiative, where they convened a couple dozen veteran teachers from across the state, and they said, what are the things that are getting in your way? And so this is everything from failure to insist on discipline for kids, to unnecessary, trainings for credentialing purposes, to cell phone intrusions. And so what they've done is they've made it a real point of pride to work down the items that teachers are flagging and say, what can we do as policymakers to create schools where you folks feel like you can do your best work each day?
Meanwhile, Rick, in Chicago, the Chicago Teachers Union has announced they're joining a nationwide boycott against Target because they dropped their DEI programs. So there you go. A tale of two approaches. Boy. Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, author of the book, Letters to a Young Education Reformer. Rick, thanks as always.
Hey, my pleasure. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. And Rick joins us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Perhaps you're a collector, or perhaps all of a sudden you have a collection. Maybe it's an inheritance. How do you know what it's worth? This is Sean Thompson for Donley Auction. The market for antiques and collectibles is changing all the time. What is your collection worth right now?